Thanks for joining me on episode 378 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hey there, I'm Cassidy Cash, the host of That's Shakespeare Life. If you'd like to impact the world one day like Shakespeare, one way to do that is listening to this. It's Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend Scott Mater.
And I'm not talking about being afraid of spiders. I'm talking about something that you're being called to do that is so big that there is no possible way you can accomplish it. Because probably that's something that God is calling you to do, because it's only with God that you can get that done. And that thing that's terrifying to you because it just seems too tremendous and large, that is what you're being called to do.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in yourself by stewarding your time, I talk with you about why motion is needed to grow, why motion often leads to effective change, and why waiting is an active process if you really want to invest in yourself.
As we talk about stewarding your time, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without just taking too long? Turns out you can't. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show just that quick. If you enjoy the show when you are ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon.
As a coach, one of the things that I often find myself encouraging my clients to do is to get moving on something. Oftentimes before they're ready, before they feel capable, before they feel like they've got the plan fully formed, to go ahead and get started. See, the truth is that motion is needed to grow. You really can't grow while you're sitting still. You can't find ways to continue to learn new skills, to develop new talents, to find ways to find new opportunities and new people to serve if you're sitting still. And as Christians, oftentimes we couch our fear and our inability to move in a faith-based sort of message. We say, we'll wait for God to show up and show us what to do. We'll wait for God to show us that this is what we should be doing. But the truth is that often, instead of waiting around for God to show up, God wants us to go out there and look for Him. He wants us to go out and see where He is working so that we can show up and work alongside that, so that we can begin to get things going where God is already acting. See, motion leads to change. And that's one of the reasons that we tend to sit still. That's one of the reasons that we tend to not begin to move and to be afraid of motion, because we know that motion brings change. We know that motion means that tomorrow is not going to be the same as today. And as humans, we don't like that. I don't know about you, but I don't like to change. I don't like for tomorrow to be unknown and different. And yet the reality is that it is, and it always is. Tomorrow is always going to be different from today. And by being in motion, it allows us to move, to pivot, to react, and to act in a way that causes us to stretch and to grow. And that's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's a powerful one. It's one that leads to change that isn't just changing passively, but changing proactively. It leads to change with a direction. See, motion has a direction. That's what makes it motion. And when you begin to move, You begin to go, and it's easier to make adjustments. It's easier to make changes after you're in motion than before. That's the truth. Think about it. If you've ever sat around and tried to steer a car whenever it was sitting still and tried to get the wheels to turn, you know how hard it is to actually move those wheels. But even if the car is moving forward slowly, it's much easier to cause it to change direction. It's much easier to cause it to move. And that is what you can do if you want to grow. You can begin to move forward even slowly, taking tiny little steps each and every day, and that will lead to more effective change. See, if you're sitting around and waiting, you need to understand that even waiting requires motion to be effective. See, if you're waiting in a passive way, if you're waiting back and sitting and waiting for the world to come to you, I'm going to start this new business as soon as the time is right. I'm going to go ahead and meet somebody new as soon as the time is right. I'm going to whatever, fill in the blank. If you're waiting for something to happen, then you need to understand that waiting should be an active process, not a passive one. Waiting should involve looking. Waiting should involve preparing. Waiting should involve learning, plowing the field before you so that when you begin to move, you're prepared, you're active, you're ready, you're engaged, and you're moving forward effectively. See, waiting often ends up being an excuse. Sitting still just to sit still, sitting still to wait for the world to happen to you instead of you happening to the world. But the truth is, that's not what God calls for us to do. That's a false picture of investing in yourself. Investing in yourself, whether you're moving or whether you're waiting, is an active process. That's why even waiting involves motion. You've got to be taking tiny little steps. So what is it that you are being called to do? What is the direction that God is pointing you in? What are you afraid of? What brings terror to your mind about doing? And I'm not talking about being afraid of spiders. I'm talking about something that you're being called to do that is so big that there is no possible way you can accomplish it. Because probably that's something that God is calling you to do, because it's only with God that you can get that done. And that thing that's terrifying to you because it just seems too tremendous and large, that is what you're being called to do. And if you've been waiting for it to happen, you've got to begin to get active. You've got to begin to move. What is the smallest step that you could take today that moves you on the path towards that thing that's so big and so audacious that only with God's help could you get it done? Take that small step today. Really. As in, stop listening to this podcast and go do it now. And what's more, tell me when you've done it. I want to hear what you're being called to do. I want to know what it is that God is doing in your life, because I can tell you there's tremendous things coming for you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of time, be sure to sign up for our Stewardship of Time Tips series by going to inspiredstewardship.com/time or texting 44222 Time Tips, and that'll get you our best tips on stewarding your time. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.